Good morning. Thank you for joining us for this roundtable discussion on reopening the workplace in a global pandemic. I'm Logan Ide, president of Latitude's Atlanta office, and I have three terrific panelists with me today. So a little bit of introduction, and then we'll get into things. Earlier this week, Wall Street Journal ran an article that talked, among other things, about the 100 changes that Volkswagen is making on the shop floor as they slowly restart operations in Europe. And of course, that just scratches the surface of the thousands of enterprise-wide adjustments a company like that will be making. In a similar but different vein, yesterday, I received a communication, which isn't showing up on the screen here, but from a local establishment that was looking for a waiver before you would come in to receive services from them. So a waiver to become infected with the COVID virus, and obviously they're doing that to protect their own business. So this is a very fluid, flexible, uncertain environment that we're in. Our goal today is to help stimulate thinking about crafting and implementing successful initiatives in what's certain to be a constantly changing environment that is different for every organization. Just for reference, our audience today is about half law firm attorneys, roughly a quarter in-house attorneys, and then a number of business owners and managers. So we're shaping our discussion to reflect the audience. As far as background and context, my company, Latitude, is a provider of experienced attorneys and paralegals to both law firms and legal departments on engagement and permanent basis. Historically, about half of our attorneys and paralegals have worked remotely and half at the client site. So I personally, in our company, come at this issue from a perspective of both an employer and as someone who's needing to interact with clients and their environments on a regular basis. Of our 4 offices, all are operating remotely, as are our field attorneys and paralegals. We've made adjustments and everything is working effectively with those adjustments. A quick bit on our agenda for today. We really teed this up as a roundtable discussion. We'll have 3 general topics for our panelists to talk through. Then we'll hit some Q&A and have some final thoughts for you at the end. We won't be able to get to every question, but we'll do our best to hit as many as we can. Our production is being recorded today, and we'll make that available sometime after the broadcast. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists and give them each a chance to talk about the background from which they're approaching the current situation, both for their own business and whether it's clients or customers or other constituents. So meet Beth Chandler, Vice President, General Counsel, and Secretary of Rollins, Inc.
Thanks, Logan. Now for me to go ahead and jump in?
You're on.
Okay. As Logan said, I'm with Rollins, Inc. The primary brand that you're probably most familiar with in our repertoire is Orkin, a global provider of pest control services. We were deemed an essential service early on as the state started their shelter-in-place order. California was first, and so we have continued to operate in this environment. Our products are residential, commercial, and termite from a pest control perspective, and mosquito. The most impacted in our business is obviously our commercial business now, because we are most of our businesses that we service are closed. So that has been an impact for our business. In the middle of it, we have launched a new product, a disinfectant product that we were well equipped to serve to our customers, and that's called Vital Clean. I think Logan's got our information up on the website now. So that's been a very popular product that we are offering to our services to our clients in this environment. As far as how we handled this early on, like most companies, most public companies, most large employers, we established a task force that I coordinated. We came out with policies and protocols. We do operate a call center where folks are very close together. We are sending technicians into businesses, homes, hospitals, so that's obviously a concern for us. We've provided the personal protective equipment that we've all come to know and be very familiar with to all of our technicians early on, and got lots of good feedback from our customers that they saw our technicians being well equipped. We did, like most large employers, have employees testing positive, and we established protocols to track those employees and have proper communication to other employees and customers during that time. We rolled out a new sick policy, giving our employees additional sick days who were impacted by COVID-19. Our executive team began to meet daily, and I think we executed a communication plan with our employees early on, and we're sending daily communications. So that worked very well and provided a lot of comfort. I think for most large companies, you're managing a lot of anxiety, and getting out communications to our employees about our employee assistance program, about our new protocols was good. My team of about 30 did go to remote workplace. I've been coming in every day because our business is somewhat socially distanced already. Many of you in the Atlanta area know we're on Piedmont, and we don't have a common elevator bank. We all enter from sort of different doors, so it's sort of set up for this. Fortunately or unfortunately, we say it's not set up for a collaborative environment, but in this environment, it's set up for social distancing. As far as my legal team, we established the mantra early on from a remote work environment, which was new to Rollins, that we would follow 4 principles. We would be incredibly responsive in this environment to our internal customers. We would obviously get our work done. We would strive to over communicate, which again, I can't stress enough, with our clients and our internal employees. Over communication is important, and it's going to be even more important, I think, in this return to workplace environment. And then the 4th principle we instituted was be empathetic. Again, we're dealing with branch managers who have lost a lot of business, or they're sending nervous technicians into people's homes. So those were our 4 principles that the legal department began to operate on. Obviously our executive committee was meeting face-to-face, and then through the infamous Microsoft Teams product that we've all come to know and love. For the law firms on the line, we did, stop a lot of our outside counsel work as courts were shutting down and delaying hearings. We said, stop work. We tried to use this as an opportunity to settle some open tort type matters. While courts were not open, we've asked our standard law firms for some rate accommodations and support as they partner with us through this. As a public company, we've continued to update the markets with our activities. We've, like most companies that are impacted, we have initiated some executive salary cuts, furloughs, and things like that to be nimble and dynamic in this environment. And we've tried to look for the positives. We've saved a lot of paper, and we have saved a lot of travel time. And we've learned how to be more efficient and how to operate through a Teams environment. So that's really what we've done through this. So anything else you want me to touch on, Logan?
Beth, I think that's terrific. Thank you. And we'll circle back to a few of the things you raised during the course. Still new to these controls. There we go. Great. Charlie, you're up. Charlie, of course, is a partner at Alston and Bird, and has been involved in their COVID-19 task force since that was stood up fairly early in this whole endeavor that we're in. And Charlie has a particular focus on employment and OSHA related issues. Jump in, Charlie.
All right. Thank you, Logan. And thank you, Beth. So internally, our law firm moved from offices to work from home on March 13. And for me, it was very seamless, totally seamless. But I know there was a lot of work behind the scenes to make it happen. And I learned later that our business managers had been doing tabletop disaster preparation drills for almost 10 years. And included in that was a tabletop prep for a pandemic. And they told me that the preparation they went through really helped them not only sort of the blocking and tackling, but also to understand the level of stress that everybody was going through, and then also just the complexities of everything that had to happen to basically, you know, shut it down on Friday and start it back up Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and keep going. And it really worked well. And like I said, I didn't notice any difference, and we just started talking on the phone. From the client-facing side, as you noted, we developed a COVID-19 task force, and that really grew organically. There were a number of people at the firm who saw COVID-19 on the horizon and what a big issue it was going to be. And they started writing and speaking about it really early on. And then there were others like myself who jumped in and started applying our background and expertise. And we've been really helped because of our deep bench in healthcare and regulatory and legislative affairs in DC. And it's been a great resource for me and the clients that I work with. And because there's, you know, lots of new issues, lots of cross-disciplinary issues that have come up. And so a lot of new teams have formed who people I've never ever worked with, learning a lot and working together to develop a really quick response and to all of our clients.
Great, Charlie. Thank you for that. And our third panelist today is Steve Sencer, who's Senior Vice President and General Counsel at Emory. Steve, of course, has a pretty unique seat in this situation, being intimately involved with both the university enterprise as well as the healthcare system. So Steve, jump in.
I guess the first thing I'd say, looking at this slide, I guess I've aged considerably during the coronavirus. Emory has three missions: education, research, and healthcare. Another way to talk about that in this kind of, we're in three lines of business: education, research, and healthcare. And just to touch on each of them briefly, the education is everybody knows now that at a certain point, schools all across the country essentially shut down in-person education and went remotely. I won't dwell on that because it has received so much attention, and anybody with kids has experienced it, and it's it's been I think exceeded a lot of expectations in some senses. There are some liability issues, but from a lawyer's perspective, it's been better. The big question mark is what happens in the fall. Research has really been hammered because we have, if you come to the Emory campus, a lot of the big buildings are filled with research. And research on coronavirus has continued. And one contribution we're making is we have some substantial important work being done on coronavirus, but everything else has effectively been shut down. And that's a real devastating and unseen component to this. And then on healthcare, as it's also been publicly reported a lot, we have essentially shut down any healthcare that isn't treated, that isn't emergency or coronavirus, so all elective surgery, doctor's appointments, and that has been hard for patients. If you look at healthcare as a business, it's been almost catastrophic to healthcare. And now Emory's fortunate with its its size and diversity involved, but there are many hospitals and physician practice groups that are going to really struggle. So with its respect to the administration, Emory very seriously sent everybody home who wasn't absolutely necessary. We're sort of very attuned to the public health aspect of this. And so everyone in my office is working from home. We're not even permitted to go back into our office the way Beth is. I snuck in a couple times, but that was sort of breaking the rules. And so we've been sent home. We have 18 lawyers. Much more than half of our work is healthcare. And it's been, as I guess Charlie said, it's actually been that part of it has been easy. And we've learned that there's some real benefits to the remote working. One is people don't have to get ready for work and travel. They're available. They're always available. Our clients are always available. We know how to get them, and no one has the excuse that they're on a plane or they're out of town. So in some sense, the work has been improved, our ability to do it, because a lot of the distractions and the availability of other people is much easier. So I'll stop there, Logan.
That's great, Steve. Interesting. Yeah. The only excuse now is if you're out walking the dog, right?
Yeah, but you can take your phone and your earbuds.
Duly noted. Well, great. Well, thank you for those introductions. I think that really sets the table as far as where we're all coming from. And you referenced. Let me go back to Charlie's comment about Alston and Bird having run tabletop exercises and planning, for this kind of thing for 10 years. Many firms, especially larger enterprises, do. Many smaller and mid-sized don't. Even those who have run, that level of testing will, of course, have to adjust to the particular situation. The topic we want to jump into now is really that. So the management framework, planning. How do we think about and approach whatever this next step is we're going into? We know what the present and past has looked like. The future is a little bit muddier. In Georgia, some additional enterprises perhaps have opened today, and so whether it's today, next week, or a month from now, everything will start moving differently and in a different direction. So I really wanted to kick this back to you, Steve, to start with, and a little bit of maybe experience and light and color and thoughts on just that of how Emory's organized, and what you think are some best practices for our audience in not just planning today, but maintaining that discipline over time.
Well, okay. So, and some of this may be out, but I guess we had an advantage in that we have experience in adapting to viral incidents. So when swine flu came around, we had to deal with that. And certainly if you go back in time, you go back to 9/11 and subsequent ones, we formed about 10 years ago a unit that is for preparedness. And it works closely with the healthcare system and the university, and frankly with CDC. And it's people who are in both the public health and healthcare space. So we were fortunate that we actually had a group, we call it CPAR, the Center for something Preparedness and Response. And so they do this kind of thing, and it's been of great value to us because it hasn't really been, the preparedness part wasn't the responsibility of senior management, it was a group. And that kicked in. And maybe like Charlie said about doing tabletop. So that kicked in, and they formed a group. And so there was really an immediate crisis response team formed. And that's easier to do on the healthcare side because that's sort of the way people are organized, right? It's very easy to drop everything and turn to a different patient. On the healthcare, on the education and research, much more challenging. But with CPAR, which is really sort of a nuts and bolts emergency thing, they were able to provide a structure for some decision making, frankly, in an environment which is notoriously unstructured and distributed. Now we're pivoting to the future. And, I keep saying that, we used to have coronavirus meetings in my team and then other stuff. Well, it's now, there is no other stuff, right? I mean, it's not as though the crisis is still occurring, but for us, it's it's just the new world that we have to move to, and knowing that that is going to change dramatically over time. It's not a light switch. It's not that we were one way and then, you know, we've been through a bad period and then we're going to go back to the way we were doing it before. And this process is going to take years until there's a vaccine. So we've sort of reformed a group. It's called a recovery group. I'm not sure that's the right word, but really for all aspects, and you know, it's got a cast of many from all different dimensions to figure out how are we going to resume delivering on our mission in a sustainable time period of you know, in a sustainable way over time, and that includes healthcare, education, and research. So interdisciplinarity is crucial. And maybe I'll just stop right there.
No, that's terrific. And I think we'll just play off of that. Yeah, Charlie, I'm sure Alston and Bird has some similar components, but I'll ask you the question more of, for this, for the going forward, what your organization, how the firm leadership is approaching that, and how you're counseling clients on that. I mean, is this a daily conversation? Is this, certain people working, full time on this and briefing others? What do you see
In terms of ramping back up and
ramping back up and planning for ramping back up and adjusting?
well, so Alston and Bird, like everybody, is looking at it and sort of cautiously evaluating how to do it. We have the benefit that we can pretty effectively work at home. So I don't think there's a huge institutional pressure to get us back. And so the work from home model seems to be working well. But in terms of, in terms of what clients are thinking about and looking to, it is, I think it's going to sort of rapidly, we're going to see the opposite of what we saw when we shut down. What we saw, when it shut down was, sort of unbelievably rapid change, at least to me, just in terms of new, monumental laws and orders coming out in a very rapid way, and every client needed that information like right then and there. And so that we're talking about our team, well, I'll give you a couple examples. Like the CARES Act came out, many clients really needed to know, what's that going to say, what it does say, all the closure orders that came out. And so that resulted in a lot of teams working together who didn't really work together previously, and then developing and just pumping out lots of information so that could get out to our clients. In terms of ramping up, like I said, I think a lot of companies are looking at it the same way we are, very cautiously, and trying to find guidance. We're all under a patchwork of closure orders, which are all different. And like the closure orders came down pretty quickly, I think the opening orders are going to come out in a wave. And there's going to be pressure to reopen. And so companies definitely need to be prepared. And the problem is there's just really very little guidance out there. I've got some sort of high level thoughts on how to approach that and sort of the ramping up. And one main thought is, I think everybody's expectations need to be managed. Like Steve has mentioned, I think this could go on a long time. CDC has noted that we should expect a second wave. I don't want to be Dr. Doom here, but I was reading Spanish flu The first wave was not so bad. It was the second and third waves in 1918 that apparently were the more fatal waves. So everybody needs to be manage their expectations and expect that that it could come back and that we may not be through it.
Great. Well, I think that's a good segue, Beth. I think you can add from our conversations, you can add a few things in the public company context of both, your structure, organization for this, and a little bit of disclosure and looking at the long term. And again, in the context of management framework, planning, and seeing this through.
Sure. We do tabletops too, and have a robust business continuity plan. You think about business continuity and pulling that trigger with a fire or a flood or an Atlanta weather issue or a cyber event, and those were the kinds of tabletops we've been doing. We had not done a pandemic tabletop, but we rushed to do some things early, and one of our key functions was making sure we could execute payroll remotely, which did go fairly flawlessly, which was one of the early things we looked at. But business continuity, making sure those plans are updated, that's been a great resource out of this that our risk group handles. The other thing that Charlie touched on that we deal with is the patchwork of laws. And I do want to give a shout out to Alston and Bird, who has been giving great resources on their website for the constant flow of closures and new laws. I mean, we're dealing with everything from, essential services being required to wear masks in the city of Los Angeles to what's Massachusetts doing on debt collection. And we have a finance company, so I really can't stress the complication. We said before, given it's complicated to do business in 50 states, this has made that exponentially difficult. But we have a workforce team. I have a full-time HR attorney who works with our regional HR folks and has calls on a daily basis to keep up with what's going on. The other thing that we found helpful from a practical perspective, and I know I keep reiterating over communicate, but my team does what we call a stand-up teams meeting every morning at 8:45. We all get on the phone, and it's really just a check-in. I mean, the lack of social interaction with folks working remotely has been a challenge for folks. And I think I've got folks who live alone. I've got folks who are dealing with homeschooling kids, just like everybody does. So we do these stand-ups. We've actually tried to make them fun. One was wear your favorite hat day. One was bring your favorite condiment out of your refrigerator. These are sort of cheesy things, but just to try to keep things light and obviously, keep up with the health status of our folks and their families. So, the other thing that we do repeatedly is benchmark. We don't want to be the only company doing something different. So we're constantly checking in.
And we may have just lost Beth. Charlie, Steve, do you see Beth?
Yeah.
Oh, good, you're back.
Sorry, my phone rang and it came in through my iPad. So there's an Atlanta GC group. We're meeting virtually, comparing notes of what folks are doing with their employees, how they're handling things. And so that concept of benchmarking to see what other public companies are doing has been helpful. There's a website called Just Capital, I think, that is a good resource, and a couple of others have been helpful to see what folks are doing.
Beth, a quick one. Again, you're kind of in the public company context, which could be equally applicable to other enterprises. Is the frequency or pace of reporting and interacting with the board increased in this situation?
Certainly we are interacting formally and informally with our board members. And folks are having shareholder meetings in this environment, so it is challenging.
Got it. Well, thanks. We're going to, there's so much to talk about there, but in the interest of time, we're going to keep moving. So we're on topic 2, and this is getting into more of the nuts and bolts of, we've all been doing the alone together thing, and, over time, whenever it is, the next drill is, how do we be together, but not too together, right? I mean, if that's, as long as that's still the primary method of maintaining health and wellness. So this is everything from physical separation to screening people who are coming into the workplace or otherwise. So there are a lot of really nitty gritty things. I mean, I was talking to a friend yesterday who was in Hong Kong during SARS a while ago, and he described that situation as the normal was wearing a mask wherever you went, and maintaining physical separation, and that was kind of the order of the day. The world's changed a lot. There's more technology and other things available to us today. So in this one, I think it would be interesting and helpful to provide some kind of, it's not crystal ball, but some kind of framework of how you see things evolving for your enterprises, or ways of thinking about those. And I think some of the answer is it's going to be, obviously all of the above, but let's try to key in on some of the more interesting ones. So as far as that, let's see, who would like to start on that one? How about Beth? You want to just pick that up again?
Sure. I mean, our environment is a little different because we do have technicians who are accustomed to wearing PPE, and supply chains are a challenge at this point, but we've got good supply chains on that. So we've got this diverse environment with folks in branches, folks in offices, folks going into people's homes and businesses, and call centers. So we've established a return to workplace group, and we're beginning to look at all these things now. But if you think you're going to be doing temperature checks, you better be ordering thermometers now, because supply chains are a challenge. So I don't know what we'll do. We don't have recommendations yet. There's some outstanding resources on a framework for looking at this. Again, Alston & Bird's got some good resources. Fisher & Phillips is another firm that we have used, and they've got some good resources on their website with phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. I think we will bring folks back in phases, which is sort of the norm. Again, this patchwork of requirements, the governor issued last night the requirements for the businesses that he's allowing to open, and they're highly technical. He's got technical requirements for each of the businesses to comply with. So compliance and communication and training are really going to be key with how this works. The other good things that are going to come out of this, as we continue to reiterate, is more Teams meetings rather than travel, and more paperless operations. We've taken this opportunity to establish a little task force to work with our field operations on some of the processes we have that are paper oriented and require physical wet signature, and we've looked to convert those to electronic. So this has been a great opportunity to evaluate those, to really stress test our cybersecurity testing while folks are working remote, and things like that. But there's lots to think about. There's more questions than answers, and I certainly don't purport to have all the answers at this point.
Well, let's see if Steve has all the answers, because he's been over the obviously the healthcare side of things, which this is their, in some ways, bread and butter. This is a different variety of that. But Steve, how do you, from what you see and are involved with in healthcare, how do you see that rolling over, and how do you see education and research behaving?
Yeah, and well, thanks, Logan. I mean, this is the question right now. And when I look at the questions asked, there are five questions have been posted by the group, and they're all basically revolving around this. I mean, we have one, and then But I look at, you know, Philip Hoover's question about, have we heightened duties to employees or non-employees? And I guess I'd a couple different thoughts. You know, everybody's asking, are universities going to open? Are schools going to reopen? And as I said before, it's unlikely to be a binary decision that we're fully open. If you think about a university, not just Emory, but anywhere, you've got gatherings in classrooms, you've got dormitories, you've got different types of dormitories. You've got dormitories with suites, you've got dormitories, then you have athletic facilities. So you got this whole range of different things, and that's just education, everything's different. As a lawyer, and so we have a group who are just spending day and night trying to figure that out and trying to see how long can we actually have before we have to make the decision. And even waiting to make a decision then impacts people because they're planning their lives around it. As legal counsel trying to advise clients in that, I don't want to say that I despair, but I think it's very challenging to provide reliable legal advice without consistent governmental recommendations as to what is safe. And the way I think about it, so we have in our world, one of our portfolios is medical malpractice. Cutting someone open is a risky thing to do. You normally don't cut a human being open, but you can do it in the right circumstances or the right protections as long as you rely on a standard of care, and thereby your activities are deemed reasonable. And this applies to Rollins, right? I mean, what's the reasonable, there's a reasonableness as to how you put, you know, pesticides around, right? Pesticides are dangerous, but if you do them correctly, then it's reasonable. We don't have standards of care for what's reasonable now for allowing students into dorms in a pandemic. A law firm leadership doesn't have a reasonable standard of care to apply for when is it okay for office workers to come in. And you go down the list. If you're the, I don't know, the food bank, the Atlanta food, when is it reasonable to let volunteers come in and repack boxes of food? Well, there's no, and all my career at Emory, we've been looking to governmental recommendations to say, as long as you adhere to the CDC, as long as you adhere to FDA, as long as you adhere to this, well, then you can do it. I fear that until we have some sort of consistent recommendations, we can't provide legal advice, and that we'll have a race to the bottom in the sense of the least, if we could get reasonable advice, we could allow greater flexibility. But without that, we've even seen it, the governor's order comes out, but people aren't going to follow it because they know that they might be exposed to liability by creating what might be perceived as a too risky circumstance because they don't have some sort of authoritative guidance that tells them what is reasonable in terms of protecting the health of employees, visitors, students, et cetera.
Interesting. And I think, Charlie, that's, you can maybe jump right into that. We know that OSHA has at least put out guidelines, but I think you can qualify that and describe how that addresses and doesn't address what Steve just went into.
Well, I couldn't agree more with everything that Steve said and Beth said. That obviously is the challenge, that there really are no standards. And there are some general standards out there, but when you're applying them in the real world, what does that mean? And there's nothing out there. And there might be, coming soon, but I think there's going to be incredible pressure on organizations and businesses to move forward even without those guidelines. So one option or one thing to consider in my experience in the OSHA world, I rely on a lot of consultants and a lot of engineers to look at, the standard, the OSHA standard, the industry consensus standard, and then try to apply it to the real world. What does that mean here? And so there are professionals out there, certified industrial hygienists who work with epidemiologists who are helping me in coming up with plans that based on what's out there and based on experience, plans on terms of how to put in protection. So that would be one thing I would consider, is basically try to look to outside expertise, absent, because we're going to be in a world for a while where there aren't any guidelines. I think the way that technically I think that OSHA would work is, CDC has guidelines. Public health authorities have not only guidelines, but orders, direct orders on what companies are supposed to do, employers are supposed to do. OSHA's approach likely will be that, OSHA has its own rules, but they don't really apply in the pandemic scenario. Some do. But so OSHA is going to be looking to these CDC guidelines, looking to these public health orders and guidelines, and using that as their recognized hazard, and likely issuing citations from that. And then from that, then presumably could grow litigation of worker claims and then customer claims. But that's how I would assume it's going to work.
Interesting. And I think that's a really good segue to our next topic, which the one that we're on, I would love to go deeper, because I think we've all seen, there's so much energy around trying to find, the ways to get to the other side of this pandemic, whether it's vaccine or treatment or, keeping sick people out of the workplace. There's so much there beyond the scope of this roundtable. But I think to Charlie's last point of how will OSHA, issue, guidelines, if not regulations or both, and when will statutory, changes be forthcoming, that kind of puts us into topic 3, which is how to, we're going to skip topic 2B because of time. I'll just make a note on that. Beth referenced it. But there are a number of things that are going to change and have changed very quickly for COVID responsiveness that may be playing into longer term trends. It may accelerate those, or that may completely create new situations. So we noted a few of those here, but paperless is being pushed forward faster. We'll see how business travel comes back over time, and remote work, of course. On the next topic, I think this is one for our audience of what should I worry about? Largely, what should I worry about as far as my legal, reputational exposure with everyone who interacts with our enterprise, employees, customers, clients, vendors. So I would ask Charlie if you'd kind of pick us up again and get that moving in a direction, and then I'll be interested to see what Steve and Beth for their from their perspectives, what they can add to that.
Yeah, they're talked about, I think, how OSHA will react in terms of enforcement, and they're going to use the CDC guidelines and state guidelines and orders as their source. I think the assistant secretary has already come out and said we don't expect to issue new regulations relating to a pandemic. That doesn't surprise me, because by the time a new regulation comes out, that would be 3 years from now. And I think they will, look to the expertise of the CDC in any event. On the workers' comp front, Georgia workers' comp does cover diseases that are work-related, and then there's a specific clause describing what that is that they're work-related and a disease that is of a character that you would not have been exposed to outside of work, and not an ordinary disease of the public. So it's a relatively high bar for a COVID-19 type disease, but it would be covered, presumably, if it's truly work-related. And on the work-relatedness front, one thing that to me is very interesting is OSHA also came out with their own interpretation of how to deal with work-relatedness under COVID-19, and basically establish a presumption that a COVID-19 illness of an employee would not be work-related in the non-healthcare setting anyway, unless there's evidence that it is work-related. And so there's some, that presumption could be overcome. So, that for claims, workplace claims, I think there is going to be a bar on causation, not a bar, but a hurdle on causation of did it really come from the workplace, both in workers' comp and other areas. And then as far as third parties, customers, vendors, I also think that there's going to be a real causation problem there for this, because for the same reason, sort of institutionally, the workers' comp system recognizes that diseases need to be covered, but if it's unlikely it's work-related or likely that it could be part of a pandemic, is not going to be covered. I think that's going to be the same rule in third-party suits.
So maybe, Beth, if you take it out a little bit broader from that, excellent discussion on the, workers' comp, workplace illness, relatedness, there are a lot of other, at least from what I've seen so far, there's a lot of other discussion around, the actions of employers potentially driving other liability. And, just in the realm of, for instances, employers, how they interact with their employees, forcing employees to do certain things or not others. And then, of course, there's everything else from, cancellations of events and contracts. How are you thinking about, monitoring, where the exposures are and what other companies should do to approach that?
Sure. Just to go a little bit further with what Charlie, how he very carefully and thoroughly talked about the workers' comp arena, which is something we're obviously all monitoring carefully. That presumption, some states are looking at extending a presumption to essential workers. So monitoring the workers' comp environment for employees in 50 states, again, is that patchwork and complexity, and the OSHA. I mean, I think the other areas, I think you've got them listed nicely here, but as far as generally, companies right now should be looking at their policies and procedures and processes and their documentation. Just like Charlie said, there are not a lot of answers. The standard for negligence is who knows where at this point. It's important to benchmark, and it's important to make sure you document the thoughtful decisions that you're making on all of the return to workplace and continuing services and things like that. The other thing I would mention is we've talked about certain areas where laws have changed, like OSHA, like workers' comp. We're getting new regs every day on every aspect of our business, from EPA to you name it. But I think you can't lose sight of laws that are still in place and haven't changed. And the ones that I would point out here for public companies are insider trading. The SEC has reminded public companies that they will be watching insider trading in this area of high volatility in the markets. You gotta be real careful on, whether you want to do a total lockdown on executives from trading, because things are so fluid and volatile. The other area is FCPA in your supply chains. Everybody's trying to get supplies however they can, and you need to think about making sure you've got good documentation for your suppliers on FCPA. FTC is still out there looking at your advertising and your marketing. So, you can't lose sight of what's still there. I think the philosophies that you see that we just don't know where they'll end are, the regulatory regime is trying to encourage employers to continue benefits for employees, to continue bearing a lot of the brunt of this financially for their employees. So we don't know where that will end, as far as this workers' comp and OSHA. I'm afraid that there'll be a tendency to make big companies responsible because, as you said, they're the deep pockets. So these presumptions will begin to shift to encourage politically. That's what you're seeing. The other thing that folks need to keep an eye on is benefits. I think, how you provide your employee benefits is going to change. I was on a call recently who said, make sure to get your flu vaccines, and Steve may chime in here, make sure you get a good supply of flu vaccines, because flu vaccines are going to be more important than ever if a second wave comes. So, this double whammy with flu and a second wave of COVID-19, you want to make sure your employees are protected. So those are some practical things that we're looking at. Debt collection is an area, eviction is an area, landlord opportunities is an area. Again, if you want to renegotiate a lease, now's a good time. So opportunistically looking at our partners and vendors, and at the same time trying to protect our balance sheet with good processes and keep up with the ever-changing environment in which we're all trying to both practice law and operate businesses.
Absolutely. That's great. And I bet, Steve, you probably have a few things to add to that. I won't put you, I will put you on the spot with a question, but so I know that, you mentioned it early in the call, but discretionary surgery, elective surgery is way down. Related to this issue, that's probably something you've had to look at, of bringing elective patients into the hospital environment, while continuing the COVID mission. But just lump that into anything else that you wanted to share with us.
Well, thanks, Logan, for giving me the opportunity to answer your question by saying something unrelated to it. So, I guess I'd say a couple different things. One, I'll come back to your question. Something not on this list is compliance with terms, conditions, or certifications related to accepting any stimulus money. If you have clients or you're a business that's taking stimulus money, there are all sorts of strings attached, and we're always attentive to not just regulatory oversight, but also False Claims Act. And some of these things, if you're making certifications to the government, be very careful about those, because you can bring a False Claims Act action against a full amount of recovery if someone can allege that your certification was not accurate. Getting more to Logan's thing, I'd lump three of these things together: contract and tort causes of action, class actions, and the search for deep pockets. Emory historically has been a deep pocket. That may not be true much anymore, but there. So if you put those three things together, there's a whole cluster of things. So, Logan, you picked one, right? What happens if someone who has an elective surgery postponed, and then they claim that they've somehow been harmed about that? What happens if a student comes on campus and then gets coronavirus? What happens if, one of Beth's employees goes to a house, and that house, the list is endless. And one of the few times that I think that the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal and higher education and health are sort of on the same page was today, when there was an editorial about the need for liability protection related to coronavirus. And I would say related to the transmission of coronavirus. If all of us had liability protection against class action plaintiff suits alleging that we facilitated the transmission of coronavirus, it would facilitate a lot. Charlie's absolutely right. Proving causation is going to be impossible, but it's not going to prevent lawsuits. And if we're all worried about a lawsuit brought because our action was was an unreasonable action that caused someone to contract COVID-19, that's going to be crippling for folks. This isn't a higher ed, or this is just everything issue. And so you put those three together, basically all clients and even law firms are susceptible to class action tort claims in particular. I'd say mass tort is really what the issue is. All subject to mass tort claims about the transmission, about facilitating or causing the transmission of coronavirus and then subsequent COVID-19 illness.
Wow. And that is, I didn't see the editorial this morning, but have seen some other discussion about immunity for different enterprises, right?
Logan, that's exactly right. There's been selective, I mean, and we're grateful. There's a selective immunity for healthcare volunteers. That's been on the books for a long time, expanding the definition of what is that. And then there's also an increased limited liability protection in certain circumstances for healthcare providers. But then if you actually go to the federal books, there is a liability protection for pharmaceutical and drug manufacturers in this time. But if someone wanted to study up on this, there are selective immunity provisions, but the wonder whether the time has come where there needs to be broader immunity protection, not for specific categories of actors, but for the transmission of coronavirus, because it's really hard to pin that on anybody. And if we're all worried about that, it's very hard for any of your clients to do business.
Absolutely.
And Logan, I can drop in. For those of us who aren't the beneficiaries of immunity, I think that really means you got to review your insurance policy. So everyone should be looking at their insurance policy. Some folks are in a renewal period, but now's a good time to make sure you understand your GL policies and how all this works from, for protection.
And fight over the exclusion, whether there's a pandemic exclusion. It's going to be brawls and brawls about that.
I'll make that transition to say I think we've helped create some, awareness, thought processes, approaches. Probably created more work for our attendees than we've saved, and that's the nature of these kind of things. We are at that point in the presentation and discussion where I've been monitoring the questions, and I think we've actually covered most of them in the discussion, either directly or implicitly. I think the askers will understand that some of these we don't have the answers for today, and that's part of the situation. So that being said, in the interest of keeping everybody on schedule, I would like to throw it back to the panelists, for a quick final thought, kind of just about summing things up, what we've talked about and, where things are headed. We'll go, Beth, start with you, please.
Sure. Thanks to everyone. I've really enjoyed the participation. I've learned a lot and appreciate you setting it up, Logan. It's been very valuable. I think there's one other point that I had in my notes I wanted to make before I kind of sum up. And that is, again, in this line of you can't forget about your day job and your normal business. One of the things we've done is continue to remind our employees about cyber and phishing, because the fraudsters are out there. You'll see folks getting these emails that look like, they're legitimate. So make sure your workforce is continuing to be diligent as they're out of their normal modes on cyber threats. And then as far as just sort of wrapping up, I think our themes are continuing this sort of nimble, dynamic approach. We learn something new every day. All the law firms have been great with their resources. Logan has posted some of the resources and checklists that we found helpful, but it's clearly, I think as the discussion today shows, it's not one size fits all. Every business is different. We have different touch points, different workspaces. You should make sure as you're making your plans to return to the workplace that you don't forget the cost element of it, because there will be changes, whether you do infrared temperature checks or whether you need to put plexiglass up between workstations. Make sure you have your finance folks involved and you are beginning to get a handle on those costs. Again, for us, a big one is PPE. So, and then, the last thing I'll say is we continue to find valuable benchmarking with my counterparts, the GCs or maybe others on the line. We get together regularly and compare notes in sort of a safe environment. So Thanks again for putting it together, and appreciate navigating this challenging time with everyone.
Thank you, Beth. Really appreciate your participation. Charlie, how about you?
Yeah, thank you, Logan. I've got three points. So one, there was a question about testing, and I would answer this way, that I think many employers are looking hard at testing, so much so that yesterday the EOC came out and said, yes, in a pandemic, testing your employees prior to return is okay. But the problem is, to me, not being a healthcare expert, like, what are those tests? Are they available? I don't think the FDA really points you to any test that's going to tell you yet on what you know, whether you're safe to return to the work, but that is something that may show up very quickly, that's going to be a standard practice. Second thing, for me, I've started to realize how interdependent I am on everybody. And so I would suggest that as companies, businesses, law firms ramp up, I would consider being transparent and sharing information so that people can at least understand, you know, some ideas, or get some ideas in this area where, like we said, there are no guideposts. And then finally, I think all of us, everybody here listening, we're going to have deep and lasting appreciation for the healthcare workers and the critical industry workers who have done incredible things to care for all of us, feed us, to protect us, and take care of us. And so we really, you know, I know we all appreciate that. I know I do.
Well said. Agreed. And speaking of which, Steve, yeah, you've just, obviously you are intimately tied to so many of those people who are on the front lines and supporting them. So.
Well, yeah, but I'm not one of them. I'm safe here in the security of my office. But I was going to say, thank you, Charlie, as an Emory representative, I want to sort of send it back. The support that Emory healthcare workers have had, as well as, you know, Wellstar, Grady, Piedmont, you know, you name it, has really been really important. I mean, there is a sense of pulling together, despite a lot of the politics. There really is a sense of pulling together, and I think a sense of gratitude that people appreciate it. And I'll just sort of send one piece of gratitude out there for all the law firms that have been sending out free legal advice. I know there's a business development motive to it. I get that, but it's really helpful. And I've had many experiences with private counsel that are really about trying to serve our common clients. In my case, my common client with law, and that's really, it's a lot of gratitude on that. I think lawyers really are stepping up and trying to understand these issues and share, not just share best practices, but and I'm going to sound corny, but share some wisdom and try to figure out how to best develop really what's going to be developing new body of law as to how do we deal with this. And you know, that's a good thing.
Well, on that point, for all three of you, I think your wisdom and experience has been very helpful to our audience today. Like you said, there are no firm guideposts today. We're all trying to figure this out together and get through to you know, the other side of you know, being a functional economy and healthy at the same time. So thank you all very much. Thank you to our audience for spending the time today. We will make this recording available, and everyone stay healthy and have a great weekend. Thank you.